Okay, the final item of business this evening is a members' business debate on motion 20595 in the name of Marie McNair on the 85th anniversary of the Clydebank Blitz. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. I call on Marie McNair to open the debate. Around 7 minutes. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am honoured to have secured this debate to commemorate the 85th anniversary of the Clydebank Blitz, and can I thank members for supporting my motion. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Clydebank artist and historian Tom McKendrick and many of my constituents for sharing their knowledge of the Blitz and shaping the contribution I will make today. I dedicate this speech to the memory of all those who lost their lives in the Clydebank Blitz. On the 13th and 14th of March 1941, Clydebank was changed forever. During those two terrifying nights, Clydebank was pounded by the Luftwaffe, dropping more than 1,000 bombs in the raid over the town, killing 528 people and seriously injuring 617. These are the official figures, but many more died later as a result of their injuries. Clydebank experienced a massive loss of housing, with 12,000 houses damaged, 4,300 destroyed, leaving only 7 houses within the area untouched, resulting in 35,000 people being made homeless. The main targets were the armaments factory at Singer's Sewing Machine Factory Works, John Brown and Company's Shipyard and Berdmore Engine Works. While most of the constituency will now be too young to remember this, the stories and feeling of sheer horror has been passed down through generations. It's not something the town will ever forget, nor should it, and it has and always will be part of the primary school curriculum. Clydebank has always been a tight-knit town. Prior to war, it had a dynamic community and one who truly considered itself socialist. The notion that we are all Jock Thompson's bairns was felt across the town. That is not to say it was a perfectly equal society. We know it was not. But across the board, the Clydebank sense of community was strong. The people were never complacent, with strikes for better pay and working conditions a part of many people's lives. Oil was a high target priority during the war, and Clydebank lay beside what has been described as a Category A target, containing potentially 178 million gallons of fuel oil. At 11:30 p.m. on the 13th of March, 2.5 hours into the raid, a 250-kilogram Mina bomb landed at the junction of Kibibi Road and 2nd Avenue in Clydebank. This obliterated the town's water mains, with supplies to firefighting services instantly cut. Clydebank burned, and people could see Clydebank burning all over Glasgow, and certainly speaking to people, they have that in their memories. Presiding Officer, it would simply not be possible to fully depict the devastation and tragedy that occurred in this short speech. As Tom McKendrick so perfectly put it, the Clydebank Blitz could not be least described in a single story. It is thousands of tragic experiences bonded together by a single catastrophic event, and like all things which entail human activity, it is complex. The Blitz had a huge impact on my hometown of Clydebank. It was the only town in Britain rendered uninhabitable due to bombing, with the biggest loss to a single family in the blitzing of Britain being the Rocks in Clydebank. 15 of the Rocks family were killed on the first night at 78 Jellicoe Street in Dunmuir, alongside so many others. Anne Holmes, the daughter of Annie Rocks and Walter Gregg, records a heartbreaking account of the impact on her family in the book Untold Stories. The book is a dedication to remembering Clydebank in wartime, and I commend it to Parliament. Anne promised her mother she would honour the memorial every year, and the Rocks family attend the service at the communal grave every year in big numbers. The Blitz caused incomprehensible hardship, anger and sadness. For the people of Clydebank, those nights were terrifying, and that was made clear from this quotation from Tom McKendrick's book. What I'll never forget as long as I live was the noise and the screams and the cries when I was taken to the first aid post. This was something you couldn't believe. The screams were terrible. People had lost arms and legs. People were doing what they could to help, but it was just too much for them. These people were your neighbours, people you'd known all your life. The dead were laid out in rows in the school. It's a sight burned into my memory forever, all those bodies lined up in neat rows. After all that noise, it was the silence that got you. Among this fear, though, was bravery and solidarity. We will never forget the many brave souls who saved others and who often sacrificed themselves. They are our heroes who will never be forgotten. Presiding Officer, the Blitz caused irreparable damage and hardship to Clydebank. Many close-knit communities were severed, with many relocated. But Tom McHenry is correct to say Clydebank's people were not strangers to hardship, and those who knew the town's history will know the psychological effect was the exact opposite of what was intended. Rather than divide the community and throw it into frenzied panic, it strengthened and immeasurably hardened people's resolve to survive and resist. This sense of community and of a shared belonging, as I mentioned earlier, has never left our town, and I hope it never will. Clydebank paid a heavy price on those nights, Presiding Officer, but the burden of rebuilding the town fell on the council and citizens of Clydebank. The replacement of houses resulted in the borough of Clydebank being left with an annual deficit of £61,000 for the next 60 years. £61,000 in 1941 would be equivalent to around £3 million now. So not only, Presiding Officer, did the people of Clydebank suffer the bombing, but they were also burdened with such a heavy charge because of the high replacement costs of capital loss in the form of houses. That was not right. Before I end, Presiding Officer, I want to pay tribute to all those who lost their lives on the tragic nights of the 13th and 14th of March 1941. 85 years on, their memories live on with the people of Clydebank. Clydebank has always been resilient, and no more so than the aftermath of the Blitz. I am forever grateful to the heroes who saved victims on those fateful nights and who helped with the rebuilding of our town. They will never be forgotten. It is hard for many of us now in 2026, 85 years on, to comprehend what the Clydebank Blitz must have been like. To understand that level of terror and anguish is hard. In remembering events like the Clydebank Blitz, we must be resolute and clear about one thing: this cannot happen again. We in Clydebank resolutely take time to remember the Blitz and those who were killed. And we also remember the brave Polish sailors of the ORP Puron who were docked on the Clyde. They fired their anti-aircraft guns at the bombers in defence of our town. And I pay tribute to those in our town who have done so much to galvanise our efforts in memory, like Cabowie St Andrew's Church, West Dumbartonshire Council, the late Jack Tasker, and so many more. Every year we gather at the communal grave at Alden Otter Cemetery above Clydebank, and we will always remember those we have lost to such evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. We move to the open debate. I call for Stephen Kerr to be followed by Jamie Hepburn. Around 4 minutes. Mr Kerr.
Well, I'm grateful to Mary McNair for bringing this motion and for her speech. She has brought remembrance to us all of the events of 13th and 14th of March 1941, when Clydebank was subject to devastation on a scale that is beyond belief. 439 Luftwaffe bombers, thousands of bombs, 528 killed, 617 seriously injured, 12,000 homes damaged, 4,300 destroyed completely. And she mentioned famously the 7 houses that were not damaged, which is an incredible statistic. Second Avenue suffered the heaviest loss of life. Whole families, as she has said, were wiped out. Streets disappeared. And the targets were strategic. John Brown's been mentioned, the Beardsmore Engine Works, the Singer Factory. Incendiaries first to set the town ablaze, then high explosives and parachute mines to finish the job. This was calculated, it was deliberate, it was the work of a regime that believed terrorising civilians would break a nation's will. It did not. And for me, this commemoration is personal. My mother was 6 years old when her own street in Birmingham was bombed in November, the 19th to the 20th of November, 1940. She lived in a small back-to-back house beside St Andrew's football ground. And that night, there was no siren, there was no warning. She remembered her mother suddenly shouting with absolute authority, "Get out into the shelter." There was no visible threat, but she and the other children in the family obeyed. They hurried into the Anderson shelter at the back of the house, and moments later, the bomb struck. Their home was obliterated. Brick, timber, dust filled the air. A fractured pipe began to flood the shelter. She told me and my sister many times how she sat in the darkness, hearing the crash of masonry above her, and kept saying to her mother, who was praying for the family, "Pray louder, Mummy, pray louder." For 6 hours, they were buried in the rubble. And when they were dug out finally, cold and soaked, my grandfather, who had been on duty as an air raid warden, was there in what had become a smoking ruin. She remembered being lifted from the rubble and passed into his arms. She carried that night with her for the rest of her life. Interestingly, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Clydebank endured that horror on an even greater scale. 35,000 people left homeless. And yet, the next morning, people dug, they rescued, they cleared, they began to rebuild. And that crew of the Polish destroyer that was docked at John Brown's yard for refitting, they manned their guns that night and they fired back. They stood their ground. That generation understood evil because it fell from the sky onto their homes. They knew what Adolf Hitler and his gangsters represented: tyranny, racial hatred, the crushing of liberty. And they defeated it. They endured the bombs. They buried their dead. They rebuilt their town. They refused to be broken. We stand here today because they did that. So we honour the 528 who were killed that night in Clydebank. We honour those who were injured. We honour the homeless. And we honour a generation that faced down violence and terror and prevailed. We will remember them, and we will not forget what they secured for us, our freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call Jamie Hepburn to be followed by
Thank you very much, President Officer. I'm very grateful to Marie McNair for lodging her motion, which gives us collectively the opportunity to mark the 85th anniversary of the Clydebank Blitz. 2 nights that have left an indelible mark, not only in Clydebank, not only on Clydeside, but all of Scotland. President Officer, I grew up in Glasgow, in a city that, through gaps in tenements that are now largely filled, but certainly as a child, it bore the scars of wartime bombing. But I was actually mainly driven to speak in this debate today in memory of my grandparents' generation, in particular that which my grandmother told me of her experience on the home front living in Dumbarton, not too far down the river from Clydebank. We know that the river, of course, was a vital artery of the war effort, and that made its communities a target. I see Jackie Bailey is due to speak, so she'll probably speak more to this, but we know that Dumbarton was also targeted the same night as the Clydebank Blitz, but thankfully suffered nowhere near the same devastation as Clydebank did. But we know that a few months later there was another bombing raid on Dumbarton, but because of that experience, through various mitigation measures, misdirection measures, decoy targets that were installed on Lancraig's moor, the town was suffered a similar fate in that bombing raid. Indeed, I can recall my grandmother telling me that her father, who was an inspector at the Garshake waterworks, was required to check on those waterworks the next day, had said if those decoy measures had not been put in place, then Dumbarton would have definitely suffered the same fate as Clydebank. Marie McNair has laid bare the horrors of the Clydebank Blitz. In 2 nights, over 400 Luftwaffe bombers dropped more than 1,000 bombs. 528 people were killed, 617 people were seriously injured. In the retelling of the history, there does tend to be a tendency to use numbers like that, but they're not just abstractions, they're not just abstract numbers. The dead and the injured It contained mothers, fathers, counted children, sons and daughters, they counted workers and neighbours. And as already been said, of the roughly 12,000 houses in Clydebank, we know that only a handful, 7, escaped any form of damage, which is quite a staggering thing to imagine. And we know that over 4,000 were completely destroyed. By the morning after the second raid, not only was there the dead and the injured, but there were tens of thousands homeless. And contemporary accounts describe families walking towards Glasgow carrying what little they could salvage, smoke still rising behind them. But we know too that the immediate aftermath brought scenes of extraordinary courage. We know that firefighters, many drafted from surrounding areas, battled flames that lit up the night sky. Rescue workers and volunteers dug through rubble in search of survivors. Churches and halls became shelters. Neighbouring towns opened their doors. And that is, for me, a salient reminder that in the face of incomprehensible hardship, anger and sadness, solidarity prevailed. But the suffering, of course, did not conclude with the last bomb. Displacement, overcrowding and trauma persisted for years. The psychological toll was borne quietly by a generation. But we know, Presiding Officer, despite that, Clydebank endured. It rebuilt its homes, it rebuilt its civic institutions, it sustained its proud industrial tradition and heritage. It did so because its people possessed a resilience forged in adversity and a determination that their community would not be defined solely by destruction. So as we mark and commemorate this 85th anniversary, we should pay tribute to those who lost their lives and to all those who were injured and displaced. And we commend the bravery of those who saved others in those dark days and who laboured in the long years of rebuilding that followed. President Officer, to remember is not merely to look back, it is also to honour a sacrifice and to reaffirm our commitment to peace, community and solidarity. We remember Clydebank.
Thank you, Mr Hepburn. I now call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Bill Kidd. Again, around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking Marie McNair for bringing this debate to the Chamber? And like others, I want to pay tribute to the resilience of the people of Clydebank. They paid a heavy price with direct strikes by the German Luftwaffe in one of the most destructive bombing raids of the Second World War almost 85 years ago. Started, as you've heard, on Thursday the 13th of March 1941, just after 9 p.m, when 236 German bombers arrived on Clydeside. Towns along the River Clyde were targeted because of their shipyards and their factories, the engines of Scotland's war effort. And even Dumbarton was not spared, as a plane actually got lost and mistook the town for Clydebank. High explosive devices and parachute mines destroyed over 100 homes and claimed 17 lives in Dumbarton. But Jamie Hepburn is right. Decoy measures, called starfish bunkers, set a series of decoy fires which directed German bombers away in subsequent efforts. But in Clydebank, the devastation was significantly worse. As Marie McNair rightly said, 528 people lost their lives that night, a further 617 were seriously injured, and thousands upon thousands more were hurt, cut or traumatised by the blasts. 12,000 dwellings destroyed. Every community, from Bowling and Old Kilpatrick through Dalmuir, Radnor Park, Parkhall, Mountblow, Whitecrook, Duntoka to Yoka, razed to the ground. The next day, almost 40,000 people started the great evacuation out of the area. Some ended up walking to Glasgow, others to Kirkintilloch. The lucky ones came to Dumbarton and the Vale of Leven. I came across a letter from Thomas Cairns, a riveter who fled his home the following day with his family and moved to Main Street, Alexandria. And he wrote it to his pal Patrick Diamond. Unfortunately, Patrick never received it because the censor wouldn't let it through. Such was the detail in the letter. And let me share some of it with you. He talked about a murderous attack on the poor defenceless women and children in their homes, terrorising and sending to eternity the peaceful and industrial citizens of the industrious town of Clydebank. He went on, "We were just sitting at the fire after the children got to bed. The gunfire started. This made us a bit panicky, naturally. A hurried dressing of the children and rush down to the close level with our neighbours, and there we remained for 9.5 hours with the bombs and landmines dropping from the moonlit heavens. They seemed never to cease. The buildings began to rock with the heavy explosives, windows blew in, doors and ceilings, slates and plaster, with mixtures of soot and God knows what. The building was on fire at the bridge end, and to keep Goering's bombers with a good target, Singer's enormous piles of wood got set to a raging furnace which could be seen for miles and high. They peppered away, never a lull in all this time. Time prevents me from sharing more, but I commend this letter to members in the Chamber. Within weeks of this devastation, production resumed along the Clyde. Thomas Cairns, who wrote the letter, was amongst those who had returned to work. The people along the Clyde were not intimidated, and the same spirit endures today. The threats we face today may be different, but they are present and evolving, and we need to make sure that the lessons of the Second World War are never forgotten. A previous generation rebuilt the towns along the Clyde from the ashes. Today, as we remember those who lost their lives, their homes, their families in the Blitz, let us honour them by paying tribute to their determination to rebuild and to defend their nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call Bill Kidd to be followed by Carl Mochan again. Around 4 minutes, Mr Kidd.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank, of course, my colleague Marie McNair for bringing this important debate to the Chamber and for giving us the opportunity to remember and to reflect. We remember the losses, the lives cut short, the families broken, the homes reduced to rubble in those terrible nights. Yet we also remember the ordinary men and women who, in extraordinary circumstances, displayed such resilience and courage. As we've heard, Clydebank bore the brunt, but the attacks were not confined there. Bombs fell across our city of Glasgow as well, especially in areas such as Partick and Temple and Knightswood. And tenements shook, windows shattered, families huddled in closes, and ultimately many lost their lives or the lives of their loved ones. In the aftermath of the Clydebank bombing, thousands of survivors fled from Clydebank and many went to Glasgow, overwhelming communities almost and already strained by war. But they were proud to open the doors to these displaced people who bravely had stood up to what had happened to them. In 2010, John MacLeod captured the trauma in his celebrated novel River of Fire, The Clydebank Blitz. And as the novel so eloquently recounts, it had been a beautiful day in Clydebank, dry and sunny, the first bashful daffodils, and after school, after their tea, until well after dusk, 9-year-old Brendan Kelly played football on Jellicoe Street with his big pal, 13-year-old Tommy Rocks. But, bedtime beckoning, they abandoned their game and sat at the tenement door, marvelling as the great full moon rose over the town, illuminating every highway and the shimmering Clyde itself. God, breathed Tommy, look at that moon. If Jerry comes tonight, he can't miss. And Jerry did come, that very night, taking little Tommy Rocks with them. The attacks that ensued were of such intensity that the explosions were heard as far as Bridge of Allen. The afterglow was visible in Aberdeenshire, from the Inner Hebrides and even from Ireland. Yet for all that suffering, for all that sacrifice, history did not always give those events the prominence it deserved. Much of the devastation and death from the German bombing raid was, for a time, wiped from our national story. The lack of adequate air defences and lack of adequate preparation were matters too uncomfortable for those in authority to confront. Shamefully, many victims were not even given proper burial, like the vast mass graves in Dalnotter Cemetery, where, without even the dignity of cardboard coffins, corpses were wrapped in sheets knotted with string. Or in the cellar beneath a Dalmuir pub, where dozens were killed, authorities did not even bother to recover the bodies, just poured in quicklime. In the national press, a photograph of that mass grave was cropped as censors' orders, so its sheer size was not apparent. As we know, the Second World War ended with the unprecedented horror of the nuclear devastation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Cities annihilated in moments, humanity brought to the brink by weapons of unimaginable power. Today, those dangers have not receded. We live in an age of renewed geopolitical tension, of modernised arsenals, of doctrines that still contemplate the unthinkable. And here in Scotland, we have HMNB Clyde, short distance from Clydebank and from our largest city of Glasgow. Just as in 1941, we must ask ourselves whether that proximity places a target on our back, whether we have learned the lessons that history is written in fire. Presiding Officer, today, as we remember these past horrors, we must speak out against the potential of today's, and we must work together to ensure they're not repeated. Can I tell you one very quick thing, please? It's going off at a minor tangent, but my granda, Davy Gray, who worked on the building of the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery in Glasgow, which is very famous, beautiful place. He was a very, very good stonemason, and he built a massive Anderson shelter at the back of our house, well, our family's house, in Temple. And the bombings continued, and one night, it was the night, it became very intense, and they were all out in the Anderson shelter. And downstairs came the old man from upstairs, and he ran in and he said, "Oh, Davy, I think we're going to get it this time. Just listen to how close they're getting there." And my granda said, "I think you might be right, Willie. I think you might be right. Just think, though, there's Wayne's in here. Wayne, put your bloody trousers on." And that is one of the true stories that took place at the time. Sorry for the industrial language, but there you go. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr Kidd, final speaker in the open debate, Carol Mochan, in around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Marie McNair for bringing this debate to the Chamber. People might ask why a member from Ayrshire, covering a South Scotland region, would ask to speak in a debate about the Clydebank Blitz. And the truth is, my dad, Bill Mochan, is a bankie. He hasn't lived in Clydebank for a long, long time, but he has always maintained his connection and spoke with pride, humour and love for Clydebank. My Nana and Papa, Annie and Jimmy Mochan, and my Aunt Agnes all lived through the 2 nights of bombing. My Nana and Papa did not speak often of the evenings, nothing about the fear, the loss of life or the effect it must have had emotionally. Rather, they spoke occasionally about the loss of buildings or the loss felt by other families. Auntie Agnes, on the other hand, did speak about the nights themselves, the noise, the shelters and the devastation as they emerged from those bunkers. I really don't think I understood this event fully until I was much, much older. I know now the Clydebank Blitz was one of the most destructive air raids in Scotland during the Second World War, which had lasting impacts on the town and its people. As others have said, the brutal attack occurred over 2 nights on the 13th and 14th of March 1941. People were killed, infrastructure damaged, and pretty much all of the population of Clydebank became homeless basically overnight. On reflection, I wonder why my elders did not really describe it in this way to me. I think perhaps, like so many working-class people, right through history, they accept things, often brutal things, that happen to their communities. There are 3 points I want to raise in my reflections about the Clydebank Blitz. Firstly, my Uncle Jim reminded me last night that the government really covered up what was happening at the time. The media reports only cited a town in Western Scotland, while official censorship suppressed casualty figures and imagery of the near-total destruction of the town's housing, photos cropped and film crews not permitted in. In this day and age, with immediate films and Instagram and all the social media we now have, it seems so unbelievable that that was so able to be restricted. Secondly, the rebuilding of Clydebank after the war. This devastation happened in 1941, and yet I have a childhood memory sitting in the back of a car, probably around 1977, over 30 years later, and asking about a little side building which had an old fireplace and wallpaper that seemed out of its time. And my papa just replied, "Yeah, that came down in the Blitz." So that was so many years later. I now think to myself, after all that time, the community, like so many working-class communities, were somewhat abandoned in favour of perhaps more affluent and less industrial communities in that rebuild. My last point, though, is how similar it feels to my own community. I live in a working-class ex-mining area, not bombed in 1941, but definitely abandoned at times by governments. Like the pit closures were an insult to the miners who contributed so much to Scotland's culture and economy, the years after the war saw de-industrialisation, which sent Clydebank into generations of unemployment, lack of investment by governments and an accepted decline of services. The miners nor the shipbuilders created these conditions. Rather, their communities fell victim to the kinds of social and economic problems we all know about and have observed. Governments had no contingency plans, no support and no sympathy for communities as times changed and decisions were made that removed opportunities from people in these areas. These are the realities working class communities continue to face. So, Presiding Officer, I absolutely pay tribute to people of Clydebank. I pay tribute to those who lost their lives during the Blitz and local people who immediately came to people's aid in so many different ways. But I also pay tribute to the communities that went on and are resilient and continue to demand that governments do better. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I now invite Graham Day to wind up the debate. Minister, around 7 minutes.
Many thanks, Presiding Officer. I want to begin by thanking Marie McNair for securing this members' debate to mark the 85th anniversary of the tragic events that took place in Clydebank over the course of the 13th and 14th of March 1941. It's entirely fitting that we come together today to reflect on what was the worst destruction and civilian loss of life in Scotland throughout all of the Second World War. It's something which should never be forgotten, especially as we move further away from the events themselves. And sadly, of course, the lessons of the past are becoming increasingly relevant as world events become more turbulent in a way we would perhaps not have expected a few years ago. Presiding Officer, standing here responding to this debate, I do have a sense of déjà vu. 5 years ago, I found myself filling the exact same role when Ms McNair's predecessor, Gil Patterson, brought a members' business debate to mark the 80th anniversary of the Blitz. Just to spare mischievous colleagues from indulging in research, let me assure them this speech is not a cut and paste from 2021. Although I have to say, Presiding Officer, that tangential tale that Bill Kidd regaled us with, I seem to have heard before, and there's a nagging doubt at the back of my mind that may have featured 5 years ago. Presiding Officer, to be serious, what is clear from the debate, and we've had some excellent contributions from members which have vividly brought back to life the events of 85 years ago. I think what's clear is that we are united in recognising the formidable spirit of the people of Clydebank, and that their courage and their determination in rebuilding their community amidst such devastation deserves lasting remembrance. As we've heard in just 2 nights, Luftwaffe bombers transformed a once vibrant industrial community into a landscape of ruin. The scale of destruction was immense, with only seven of approximately 12,000 homes undamaged by the Blitz, and 35,000 people left homeless, and so many families devastated by loss and injury. It's almost impossible to comprehend the scale of what unfolded. Those nights left an indelible mark on Clydebank, but they also forged a legacy of unity and resolve that continues to define the community today. In the face of devastation, people pulled together and worked tirelessly for 3 days to rescue trapped victims and minimise loss of life. Their actions serve as a lasting reminder of the strength that can arise from even the darkest of circumstances. And of course, not only was it the people of Clydebank that pulled together, but the brave crew of the Polish Navy destroyer Orp Bajoran. It came to the town's defence, as we heard, when it was docked for a refit at John Brown's shipyard. Coincidentally, the vessel was constructed in the same John Brown dockyard at Clydebank that she later defended during the Blitz when she was acquired by the Polish Navy in 1940. By the time of the Blitz, the vessel and its commander had already played a key role in the sinking of the German battleship, the Bismarck. The story of the ship and her crew are symbolic of the enduring ties between Scotland and Poland, which span centuries and reach across culture, economy and society. The very depth of our ties is demonstrated by the fact that by the 17th century, there were over 30,000 Scots in Poland, and we're extremely grateful to our large Polish community today for having made the opposite journey and calling Scotland home. From the courageous Polish soldiers of World War II to the young families who have settled here in more recent years, and the many Polish nationals who now contribute their talent and dedication within the Scottish Government, we thank them for their service and the vital role that they play in the shaping the Scotland of today. And of course, the redevelopment of the former John Brown shipyard in 2022 now called Queen's Quay, where the Orp Pojurum was built and docked on the night of the Blitz, marked a major milestone in the regeneration of the historic shipyard site. The first phase of the development has delivered 146 high-quality affordable homes, which is a significant investment in the future of Clydebank's community. And of course, we have a monument commemorating the civilians killed during the Clydebank Blitz that was unveiled in Western Bartonshire in 2009, with the names of the people inscribed. Let me just finish this point, I'll give way. The names of the people inscribed in a bronze plaque. And the memorial sits over the remains of Clydebank's unclaimed dead to ensure we never forget those who lost their lives, and to ensure current and future generations learn of these historic events and the strength that emerged from them. And I give way to Stephen Kerr.
The excellent speech he's giving. Does he think it's highly appropriate that we're having this debate today on this subject, given it's the 4th anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and that there have been at least 15,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died? The lessons of Clydebank, the lessons of this country's experience in the Second World War are not lost on us now as we support the Ukrainians. Does he agree with that sentiment?
I absolutely agree with that sentiment. Oddly enough, as I was sitting here earlier today thinking about this debate, that was the thought that was going through my mind, that this is unfolding in Ukraine right now. So we really haven't learned the lessons of the terrible tragedy of 85 years ago. As I prepare to step down from my role as Minister for Veterans Officer, I find myself reflecting on what a privilege it's been to represent our armed forces and veterans community. And commemorating the Clydebank Blitz reminds me, as I think it should do all of us, that sacrifice during conflict is not solely the preserve of combatants and their families. Remarkable courage was shown in Clydebank in the face of profound loss and unimaginable hardship, and it's absolutely right and proper that we recognise that tonight. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.